Okay, now the next thing I wanted to tell you about is the special case of check all that apply. What's that mean? Okay, so our one variable where somebody can answer yes to multiple items to the same question must be made into a check all that apply category, and each one becomes yes, no. That's much easier if I actually show you what I mean. So let's go back to our data dictionary. Now you'll see I've gone and filled in the rest of the data dictionary, right? So we left off here, right? So I gave the same thing, humor, right? 1, 2, 3. Laugh, tell, smile, right? Laugh, tell, smile, right? Laugh at my jokes, tell me, smile. I did the same with aloofness, right? First 3 letters for aloofness, 1, 2, and 3, and it refers to the question. Also, I did the same thing for happiness. Right now, this all that apply, you'll see in your life events, right? It's one question. It says, please tell us if these events ever happened to you. Now, there's have you been mugged as A, have you been robbed as B, and have you ever been chased aggressively as C? Now, what's the trouble in making this one question with categorical responses? The thing is if more than one event has happened, there's no option for that. Let me show you what I mean. So you see I also filled in the SPSS database. Now here's events. Suppose someone called that item events, right? So here it is, events. Now we go over here and it says, have you ever been? And we look under this, so have you ever been 1, mugged? Have you ever been 2, robbed? 3, chased aggressively? So you could say, well, if someone has been mugged, then you would just, for that item, you would just say 1. Right, that would be the response. But what if they've been mugged and chased, 1 and 3, or mugged and robbed, 1 and 2, right? You can't indicate that just by one question. So what you need to do is forget about this, pretend that doesn't exist, and you would change it into a different variable for each category in that question. So it would become event 1, mugged. Have you ever been mugged? Yes, no. Right? Event 2, robbed. Have you ever been robbed? Yes, no. And event 3, chased. Have you ever been chased aggressively? Yes, no. That way you can report how many exposures the person has had, and it doesn't limit to the combination they could indicate, right? And you'll also see that we've changed the data dictionary so each category, mugged, robbed, chased, is its own variable with its own 1 and 0 responses. Okay, so to put it succinctly, so there's one exposure question, but the exposure question, one question, becomes 3 variables, as we've shown. So now comes the point where we will enter the data. So now we have the variables all named, and the database is all ready to have data entered into it, right? So let us access the first survey, survey 1 for the happiness study. All right, here we go. All right, so for example, let's say the person is a female, gender female, and 29 years old. So how do we enter that in SPSS? Well, we'd go over here. Now, it's nowhere to enter it here, right? That's the variable view where we created the variables. You click here for the data view. Oh, there it is. There's where you enter the data, right? So here are the variables up here that we just created, right? And if you put the little arrow there, it tells you what the actual items are, right? People laugh at my jokes, right? So if you forget your shorthand, you can actually see what it says. So ID, right? So the first one was ID1. Then gender. So hey, what's gender, right? Do we remember what gender was? Well, all you have to do is look at the data dictionary, right? Because that's what it's for. It's like, oh, gender is going to be a 1, right? So then you go back, and for the gender space for ID1, you put 1. Now remember that the survey said they were 29 years old, right? Age 29. Do they have a lot of bills monthly? No, they do not have a lot of bills monthly. And their highest level of education is a bachelor's degree, right? So many bills monthly, no, and no is always what? A 0. And you can also, for categoricals, click on right here, and you put bachelor's degree, right, which is number 4, I believe. And if you want to check that, you could click this. See this little 1 and A? If you click that, they turn into numbers, right? So actually what's on the data dictionary, right, are numbers. If you click it back, it becomes, text, like the values you gave it. Okay, so go back to the survey, right? So we're just entering this one, and we look at humor, right? Now, what did she say? People laugh at my jokes a good bit. They tell it funny a good bit, and smile around me a good bit. So that's all a good bit for all 3 humor. So if we look here, we have our humor, 1, 2, 3, and we have our numbers. So a good bit is 3. So for this case, 1, 2, and 3 is 3, 3, 3. So go back to back here, and it becomes 3, 3, 3. Right? So we'll do that really fast for the rest of them because I think people are getting the hang of it, right? So the next is 2, 2, 2. Now we're getting over, so let's just finish our happiness, right? So there's 1, 2, so it's 4, 2, 4, 3, right? 4, 2, 4, 3, and then 2. And then we're going to get to our life events, right? So that's a fake item, the events one, because we said that's not the way you do it, right? So let's look and see what she reported for events. She said that, have you had any of these? No, 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 right? So we have 0, 0, 0. And then if she said, have you ever been chased? And then that's the number of times chased, right? What does it become? It becomes not applicable because she can't tell us how many times she's been chased if she's never been chased, right? So that would be 999. And there you go. That's the first case entered, right? The first case entered. So you only have 1,000 more to go. Okay, so let's go back to our slides. Right? Now, number 2, so we enter that one. So number 2 becomes, do the same for all the surveys, or as they say, wash, rinse, and repeat. Right? So all the surveys entered in there, and you're good for the analysis. Now part 2, cleaning the data. This is a substantial task, very important. So what we want to look at when we're cleaning the data is, are all the data entered correctly? Are there any conflicts within the skip patterns? And 3, is there evidence of an invalid response? So let's take those one at a time. So number 1, are the data entered correctly? So it's very easy, you know, when you're entering many items or many items to get thrown off and not enter some data. So we want to make sure that data are entered. We want to make sure they're entered correctly. Now, so a lot of the times what people will do is they'll take the actual surveys and enter them. Then they'll take the hard copies, you know, the actual surveys people filled out, and they'll give them to someone else to check against what's in the database. So somebody will do what we did and enter a survey like that, and then we'll hand all the surveys over to someone else. And that somebody else, let's make that smaller, that somebody else will take these surveys and say, oh, this person's a female and they're 29 and they don't have many bills, and they'll look in the database and they'll say, oh, look, they entered, they're a female and they're 29 and they don't have bills, and they'll just follow it across and check it against all the answers. And through that way, they could check if the data are entered correctly. Now, the other thing is you'll see in the slide here, I have a question mark, 10%, because sometimes what people do is if they have 1,000 surveys, they don't want to check 1,000, so they'll select every 10th or every 3rd, and they'll do that for 10% of the surveys. And if there aren't any mistakes, or if there are very few mistakes, they have confidence that the data are entered correctly. Some people will check them against the database, all of them, no matter what, which is a safe way to go. And you'll also see here, it says, watch for the one item miss syndrome. What does that mean? I'm going to tell you. It means this. Suppose you're entering your data, right? And it's like, you know, 1 and 34. And then someone says, hey, do you want anything for lunch? And just for a second, you look up and you answer them, and your attention gets removed. And then when you look back down, you forget where you were. And then the many bills monthly, you start here. So many bills monthly, no. Education, too, right? And then what happens is everything is off by one number because you've missed one item, right? Or you could double enter one item or anything like that. But then every single number after that is off one. It needs to be put in one cell back. And that happens quite a bit, unfortunately. Something to watch out for. Okay. Now we have number 2. Conflicts with skip patterns. This is another big one, right? So, for example, remember we had the item, have you ever been chased, right? Many times someone will answer no to that item, but then to the next question that should be not applicable, they'll put a number in there, which results in missing data because you don't know what the truth is, right? So let's take a closer look. So with our survey here, if somebody was completing this survey and they got to C, have you ever been chased aggressively? And they indicated checked here, which is no. But then here they enter, 23 for 23 times, right? Well, then you don't know. Is it no, you've never been chased, or yes, you've been chased and it's 23 times? See, the tricky thing is if you wanted to do a study and you say people who have been chased have more anxiety, and you don't look at this part with how many times, all the people that said no, right, here, so all the people that say no, have you ever been chased? No, and that have 999, you have to throw that data out, or that have a number instead of 999, you have to throw that data out. But if you don't do the check by looking here and seeing if there's been a number entered, and you just consider that variable without checking it against that one, you could just use these indiscriminately, like these responses, without seeing the conflicts here, and you might have to actually remove cases after you start the analysis. So anyway, the point is just make sure you check the skip patterns before you do anything else so you know if the data should be missing. Now, the evidence of an invalid response. The first thing to check are the scores that people enter, right? So outside of the scoring range is a big one. So we know for the item, I am a happy person, the scores can only go from 1 to 5. So if you check it and someone has entered a 6, right? So if we look under here, okay, over here, and that's right here, right? Hap1 happy. I am a happy person. So if somebody, it's a 1 to 5 range, right? Remember? 1 to 5. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So if the next case someone puts a 6, right? Then we know that that's an invalid response because it's outside the range of the scores. So we check that out. Then let's get back to our slides. Then extreme scores, right? Evidence of invalid responses, extreme scores. So if they say, how many times have you been chased? And they say 88 times, you might think that's rather extreme. You might leave it in there, but you might want to make a note when you do your analysis that there was one case that said that they were chased an inordinately high amount of times. And then also, just don't do it mechanically. Also use logic. Like think Seinfeld. If you ever notice that kind of humor, it's always questioning logic. Like there was one joke he used to say that there was a commercial for Tide where they would say, "Oh, Tide's so strong you could get blood out of clothes," and they'd have a little spot on the clothes, and they'd put the Tide on it and wash it, and it'd be gone. So Seinfeld would say, you know, if your clothes are soaked in blood, maybe laundry isn't your biggest challenge right now, right? So there's all these logic questions that people might miss. For example, the chased 88 times, maybe they were chased 88 times, but the logic part is, why would they remember 88 times, right? If they were chased 88 times, that's fine, but I doubt I mean, maybe, but I doubt they counted each time they were chased, right? I mean, it could be that they were chased for 88 days in a row, and they just happened to remember that. But you know, the logic part is a big part that fits in here. Now, in summary, Lao Tzu, ancient China, he said that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and I suggest that a study of 1,000 participants begins with a single keystroke. To be specific, once that first piece of, once the first data point is entered, right, analysis does not begin with statistical testing, but with the first data point being entered, right? So as soon as someone takes out that survey and enters that first question, that's when the study begins, because a lot of people consider it that it begins when they start doing means and they start doing t-tests and things like that. That's the statistical testing, and that's all fine. But the thing is it's all interconnected, and one step depends on the last step being done correctly. So the data analysis study begins with that first piece of data being entered. Now, mistakes in data entry and cleaning can negate everything that happens afterwards. So if the data are entered wrong, then everything that's done after that is going to be meaningless, right? So like if for our happiness study, if every time someone indicated a 5, you know, totally happy, for some reason I put a 1 by mistake, that would look like the happiest people were the least happiest, right? And it would be meaningless. So at the best, you would have to go back and redo everything. And you saw in our steps of data analysis, we have like 5 more steps to go, and they're all very involved, and there's a lot of details with each of them, right? So you could imagine if you have to go back and redo all those steps just because the data entry wasn't done right, that's going to take a lot of time, and a lot of people probably end up frustrated. And that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario, well, the worst case is that you report your findings and treatment decisions are made on those findings, right? But another worst case scenario short of that is if you report the findings and you put them out in the field and then someone says, oh, the data entry is done wrong, then you have to retract the findings and contact everybody, and if it's been published, you have to contact the editor of the periodical and tell everybody that the findings were not done right and they're not credible and reliable. Needless to say, that's something you definitely want to avoid, right? So that's why I say when you start doing data entry and cleaning, that's the point to start taking everything very, very seriously, because if that's done wrong, that everything's off, and it could lead to a lot of embarrassment and disaster. So as point 5 says, take it seriously and do it right. Okay, thanks everybody. I will see you the next webinar.